to tell a story this morning and then share some thoughts off of that story. And so I'm just going to ask you to listen for a little bit, maybe take some mental notes, and then I'm going to share some thoughts with you this morning. Joe is about 17 years old, and from a larger family. He has several siblings. Joe's actually, he was one of his favorites of his dad. I don't know how many, like just curiosity, sidestep for a moment. Like how many of you would say that you were kind of the favorite child at home? Yeah, keep your hands up. Me too. Okay, hands down. How many of you knew that there was a favorite at the home and you weren't the favorite? Go ahead. Come on. Yeah. So, right. So this is one of the situations, and Joe basically was the favorite. He also felt that God had a really strong call in his life, and he kind of, he made sure people knew that God called him, that God was leading him, and so really he was born with a lot of promise and potential. And Joe lived in this culture, society where it's kind of an agrarian culture, and so part of what they did for a living was they would farm and they would raise sheep. And so he had several of his brothers had taken off to feed the sheep. And so Joe's dad said, "Hey Joe, would you go find your brothers, and we've got to give them some food and to see how they're doing." And so Joe's at about 17 years old at this time, and he goes and he tries to find his brothers, and it's a long story short, but he eventually finds them. When he finds his brothers see him coming, and they devise this plan that they want to kill Joe. Which I'm thinking, man, what kind of family life is this? I understand the nature of favorite children, but how bad is it where you want to kill one of your siblings? Don't raise your hand if that's you. But what was happening where the siblings kind of say, you know what? I feel like our family's better off if Joe's just dead. That's tough. You think you have a bad relationship at home. I think this is a whole nother level of bad relationship. And so they decide that they're going to kill their brother, Joe. And so they find the cistern and they throw Joe down it. And I'm sure he's like, hey, help. And maybe he thinks this is cruel. It's a cruel joke. How many older siblings played jokes like this on your brother or sister, right? Yeah, me too. And so maybe he's like, this is just a cruel joke. My siblings are harassing me, and maybe he thinks that, hey, it's going to get better, and so he's yelling, hey, it's not funny. Maybe, I don't know, 17, what does he do? I don't know. His brothers start eating their lunch that Joe brought them, by the way. They start eating their lunch, and they see in the distance a group of people traveling, and so they have this idea. What if we, instead of killing our brother, what if we make some money off of him? Which again, this sounds like this is just horrible. And so, and this is still very much real in cultures today. The idea of selling someone as a slave to somebody isn't a completely foreign concept, even in our world today. Maybe not in the U.S., but definitely around the world. So this caravan of people come, and they're like, hey, we have a 17-year-old brother. Would you be interested in buying him? And so they say yeah. So they open up this lid over the top of the cistern. And, I'm sure Joe's thinking, hey, okay, the joke's over. Now I'm free. That was real funny, you guys. Ha ha, right? To his demise or to his hurt or whatever, he finds out that's still going on, and he gets sold as a slave to this group of people. The boys, now distraught of man, what are we going to do? What are we going to tell Dad? They devised this plan that when they get home, they took an article of Joe's and they dipped it in some blood, and they walk home, and they get home, and they're like, hey, Dad, have you seen Joe? because we found this as we were traveling home. Here's like, it looked like his coat. We're not sure if it is, and then they show it to his dad, and the dad's heartbroken. He's like, no, that's Joe's. He must have been killed by an animal, and devastation. I'll just pause for a moment as we continue the story. Joe is 17. On the way to who knows where. He's betrayed by his own family. For Joe, life is over as he knows it. He has no family. He has no friends. He has lost all sense of security. Strange place, a strange language, and honestly, no one to love or to be loved by, and hope is gone. Let's go back to a different character in the story. Dad is devastated. He loved Joe. Maybe his favorite, maybe not. But he definitely loved him, and he knew that Joe had a calling on his life. And to make matters worse, Joe's dad felt like it was his fault. I'm the one. I told Joe to go check on his brothers, and if I wouldn't have told him to go check on his brothers, he would have been killed by an animal. This is all my fault. What was I thinking? How many can relate to the story in that sense that the dad says that this is me. This is my fault. And so now dad is living this empty, meaningless life of feeling like heartbreak and self-blame and honestly like a failure. So the story of Joe goes on. He ends up working for a very influential person. Somehow Joe, even in this 17 years of age, he somehow is able to remain faithful to God, and he still is working hard and doing the right thing, and he does his best, and somehow during 10 years, he's 28 years old now, he has put himself in a place where he is now really trusted by the guy that bought him, and almost a confidant, a close friend. And so Joe's doing everything, and a good, he almost feels like, okay, what happened 10 years, 11 years ago was horrible, but I feel like maybe God is bringing some new things in my life. And he's got some new levels of leadership, and he's got people that he's leading, and life looks different, looks more positive. And in that moment, his boss's wife says, hey, Joe attempted to rape me. This is horrible. And Joe was like, yeah, I didn't do it. I didn't attempt to rape her. I never would have done that. I've been faithful for 10, 11 years. I would never do that. And his boss wants nothing to hear with it. He believes his wife completely. You attempted to rape her. And then Joe now gets thrown into prison. Now just imagine this. So you, for a season, felt like maybe God was beginning to work some things in your life. Healing was coming, hope was coming, restoration was coming. And at this pivotal moment, when you feel like everything is beginning to turn better, all of a sudden catastrophe hits yet again. How many relate to this story at all? So he's in jail, and again, somehow Joe is able to hold on to faith. Once this child of promise, once this special call of God on his life, yesterday a highly respected man, today he has nothing, he is nothing, and yet he holds on, faithful and honest and consistent. And within 2 years, Joe becomes again someone that can be trusted even within this jail. Joe is now 30 years old. The leader of this entire nation has a dream. And he begins to find people who can interpret this dream that he has because he feels like it has significance. And in his leadership realm, he's got someone that works for him that says this. He says, hey, listen, a couple years ago, I was in jail, and there was a cellmate, and two of us had a dream, and he predicted both what the dreams meant and what would happen. And he said, maybe this guy, Joe, can understand your dream, and maybe he can give meaning to it. So sure enough, this king of the country calls in Joe, and he says, hey, listen, I heard that you can interpret dreams. And Joe's like, no, I can't, but the God that I serve can. And so the king tells Joe the dream, and Joe says, listen, let me just pray about it, and I'll come back to you tomorrow with an answer. And so Joe goes back, he prays about it. And sure enough, God tells him two things. He tells him what the dream meant, but then he also tells him how he should respond. So the next day, the king calls Joe back, and he says, hey, did you get anything about this dream? And sure enough, he's like, yeah, here's what the dream means, and here's what we need to do. And so Joe says basically this, that the dream means there's going to be this huge famine, and our response to what's coming is that we need to start setting up and saving grain now. And so the king listens to Joe. And so sure enough, over the next few years, Joe starts saving grain and putting things aside. He begins to be elevated and keeps trusting in God and keeps being faithful, keeps honoring God and the community that he's a part of. And finally, after about 7 years, indeed, there's this huge famine that's been here, and nations are coming, and like this nation that Joe's working for is becoming super, super wealthy, reaching all the area around them. And then finally, the brothers that sold him into slavery show up one day. And they say, hey, like, we're not going to live. We're going to die. Is there anything that you can do? It's a long story, short. Somehow Joe forgives his brothers. He's reunited with his family. And maybe you recognize the story. And I didn't want to tell you who it was because so often we read a Bible story and we think we know what it means. And we don't read it like it's the first time. But there's some incredible meaning in the story. And I just want to share with you this huge verse that is applicable to all of our lives, like every day, just as much today as it was a few thousand years ago. And here's what Joseph said. He said, hey, don't be afraid. I'm not going to his brothers, don't be afraid. And he says, am I in the place of God? And then verse 20, you intended to harm me, but listen, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. I want to share just a few thoughts this morning with you. Throughout God's word, there's really one consistent theme. And it's something I think we need to remind ourselves of today. That God is in charge. That it doesn't matter what happens in our lives. It doesn't matter what happens around us. It doesn't even matter what happens to us, but that God, there's a word for this, God is sovereign. And we say that God is sovereign. What we mean by that is that God has absolute authority, that there's unlimited power and complete control over all things. In other words, when God has a plan and a purpose for our lives or for our world or for our nation or wherever it might be, there's nothing in this world or in the world above us that can stop God from doing his plans in our lives and through our lives. Like, that's what it means to have a sovereign God. It doesn't mean that God creates chaos. It doesn't mean that he creates evil. As a matter of fact, God can't be evil. But practically speaking, God is in control, church, even when it feels like life is out of control. That's what it means when we say that he's sovereign. And as followers of Christ, there's really nothing that happens in your life or in my life that God is not redeeming and cannot redeem and make something beautiful out of it. Like, that's our hope. That's what we believe. That's what we hold to, is that nothing happens in our lives, around our lives, that God cannot and will not redeem and make something beautiful out of it. As a matter of fact, that is something that I've shared so often. Romans 8:28 reminds us, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. If you are a follower of Jesus today, you are loved and you are called according to the purposes and pleasures of God. And that means that God is sovereign over your life no matter what happens. When Joseph went to check on his brothers, he wasn't just walking into this random moment. Instead, he was really walking into a divine appointment. It didn't feel divine. It didn't look divine. But God was at work behind the scenes. Yeah, Joseph had a call of God in his life. But it wasn't the call of God that he probably would have chosen, that you would have chosen for yourself. But isn't that often the way that God works? We often feel God calling us, but to our call of God feels grander and amazing, but God often calls us to brokenness first. So yeah, he had a call of God on his life, but it wasn't the call that he anticipated. He was being called to be a slave so that God can elevate him to be a king. And in Potiphar's house, when Joseph is falsely accused, the lies, the injustice, the prison sentence, from Joseph's perspective, I'm sure it felt like I lost everything, that God failed me, and here I go again. I'm being as best I can, and once again. And I'm sure for Joseph, it had to feel like this is it. But from God's perspective, Joseph was being moved closer to the meaning and the purpose that God had for him. It was just a step in God's process toward the calling that he gave to him. God was going to move him to the house of the king of Egypt. And so in prison, Joseph interprets the dreams of two of Pharaoh's servants. So when Pharaoh has a dream of cows and grain and no one can interpret it, Joseph is already ready. Suddenly the cupbearer remembers Joseph. Joseph is brought out of prison, cleaned up, and ushered into the throne room, God's man at the moment. And so in a single day, Joseph went from forgotten to a national leader. So I want to give you just a few thoughts. Here's what I know, church. I know there's someone here that you had a dream. I know you felt that God was going to do something in your life. Maybe you felt something major was supposed to happen, but like it all came crashing down in an unexpected way. Sometimes it feels like you're at a dead end and you just keep spinning your wheels and you just like, everything bad seems to happen. And I just want to tell you today that God is greater than your dreams. Like, I think someone needs to hear that this morning. That God is greater than your dreams. Maybe it was a marriage that fell apart. You had this idea of this perfect marriage and it just simply didn't last. You know, last week you signed divorce papers, but I'm here to tell you this, that God is greater than your marriage. Maybe it was a job and you worked hard and you did your best, but you were let go, and this loss of a job feels like God is stopping this planning for your life. And again, I'm here to shout it to you that God is even bigger than your job. Maybe it's a death of a loved one, your mom, your spouse, your sibling, your friend, and you're like, God, how could this happen? But again, I want you to know that God has got this. It doesn't feel like it, but that God's got this. Even death itself can't stop God's plans and purposes for your life and in your life and around your life. And the list could go on. Maybe it's a ministry calling. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's a financial dream. Maybe it's an addiction that you struggled with. Maybe it's a habit that's killing you. Like, you just need to hear this, that God's sovereignty is not fragile. That means that what happens in our lives, that God isn't going, man, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this, but you need to have a confidence and assurance that even when you can't see what's happening, He's working in ways in your life that you can trust and that you can depend on, even when you can't see it. Human evil, injustice, betrayal, failure, suffering cannot derail God's plans and purposes for your life, period. And it's okay to be sad, right? It's okay when you go through a loss and something happens to grieve that and to walk through that. I guarantee you that Joseph, when feeling betrayed, wasn't like, oh, okay, God's got this. When he was betrayed again in Potiphar's house, he wasn't, oh, it's just another day. Like, I know that Joseph went through things and situations and concerns, but in all of it, he still remained faithful to the God of his father and the God of the universe. He remained faithful. He remained steadfast. And if I can, share just a couple, or maybe a big idea, maybe even under this big idea. I think so often we feel like the things that happen in our lives, let me put it a different way. We often look at the end as our goal. And so sometimes we place this end moment, if when I get here, then meaning will happen and purpose will happen and destiny will happen. And when I just get to this place, and I think sometimes we miss out on the plans and purposes of God, and recognizing that the things that happen in our life are not detours in this plan, or not like obstacles, but they're often the very roads that God is using to get us to where He wants us to be. Like, does that make sense to you? For Joseph's life, all of the situations that happened were not obstacles to God's plan and purposes for him. They were actually the very road that he needed to take to get to where God wanted him to be. And I just want to ask you today, can you take the situations in your life and the moments that you're going through, and can you just say, God, you know what, like, this really stinks, but I give it to you, and I embrace this path as I follow you wherever you lead me. God's sovereignty is not fragile. The fact is that God is always writing a story bigger than our own. God is always writing a story bigger than you or bigger than me. Joseph's life really wasn't about Joseph at all. It was about a covenant that God had made with Israel. It was about a future Messiah. It was about saving a nation. It was about something larger than what he could see. And church, please listen. Your story and my story are part of something that is larger than you or me. It's God's story. And we get to play this part in the story of God. And I count that an incredible, incredible privilege.